We're starting the Shem Alpha has not yet arrived yet because they're still in their program. We apologize for the change of schedule. And thank you very much for everyone that's here. It's a great honor to welcome Tanchum Cohen. Rabbi Cohen is a senior Rabbi at MTA. He gives perhaps one of the top shiurim in all of America, in high schools in America. He is an assistant rabbi in Beth Abraham, very much beloved in the congregation, his students, his congregants, and he's a person that's involved in the YU Masmidim program as well. Above all, from my interactions with him, I could say, like it says in Pirkei Avot, Hillel Omer Habeni Talmidav Shel Aaron, Ohev Shalom, Odev Shalom, Ohev et Habriot, U'Mekarban Torah. Someone who truly is a man of peace, someone who is Na'im Alichot, someone who he makes a Kiddush Hashem by his presence of representing Torah, and people want to be closer to Torah after being close to him. So it is with great pleasure that we introduce Rabbi Tanchum Cohen. Thank you very much for coming. He came straight from the airport, you should just know, from the plane, homage to Lev HaTorah. So Yeshivat, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to learning Torah from you.
I want to thank Rav Mori for your very, very kind exaggerations. And I want to thank the Rosh Yeshiva and all the Rabbanim for the opportunity to come join your base medrash and feel the heartbeat of Torah together with you here in Lev HaTorah, and to discuss Torah together. The Kollel is learning Yeshivat Lev HaTorah, and I was thinking maybe we should get together and talk about some of the definitions of Bishul in the context of Basa B'chalav, in the context of Bishul Akum, and the Yeshiva is learning Bav Metzia, and Hashavas Aveda, Migo, Eidos. There's so much to talk about, and you are learning that, and you should continue to power through, you should continue to explore. I felt personally, as a guest, and straight off the plane from Chutz La'aretz, in such a momentous week, I wondered whether if I would just walk in and talk about Migo, I would be in violation of Eino Makiris Makomo, in a certain sense. Not to be aware of a context, not to be aware of a place and time. Chazal tells Masechas Brachos that there are four things which require a chizuk, four parts of our Avos Hashem that particularly require ongoing reinforcement and ongoing investment. And one of those four is tefillah. Sometimes it requires chizuk in terms of the feeling, the lave of the tefillah. Sometimes it requires chizuk and reinforcement in terms of the ideas and the understanding. And I think often it's the case that if you work on both, the understanding and the feelings of tefillah can play off of each other. When we think about tefillah, when we think about davening, we think about prayer, whatever you like to call it, if you actually think about it, a couple of pretty basic questions come to mind. Number one, I think a lot of us practically, tefillah tzricha chizuk, a lot of us sometimes struggle with how to daven better. What would it even look like to daven better? Or I have this image of how I want it to be, and I know I'm supposed to work on my tefillah, but it might not be 100% clear exactly what does work on my tefillah. What would it look like? What do I do? Sign me up. That's one sort of practical question. Where do we even start? Number two, if we think more broadly, and we'll be honest with ourselves, when I say tefillah, when I say daven, there may be more than one picture that comes to mind. And if you stop and think about it, they seem almost contradictory. Because one picture of tefillah is a person standing by the kotel, a person standing in the base medrash, you're walking down the street, there's something on your mind, you got an important phone call, national news, personal news, something in your head, and you talk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a parak of Tehillim, or a personal conversation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in English, in Hebrew, in any language. An informal, very authentic, genuine conversation. That's one thing we might think about when we talk about tefillah. When we talk about tefillah, we also might think about this. You have a siddur, Yom Tov Tam you have a machzer. There's a structure, there are words to say. First you say this, and then you say that. Shachris, Mincha, Marav. Shabbos is different. As an aside, just to throw in a 10-second hit, Do you ever consider that Shabbos is the only day of the year when the Shmona Esrei, speaking of Shacharis, Mincha, Mariv, when Shacharis, Mincha, and Mariv are actually all different and distinct from each other. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Purim, Pesach, the Shacharis and the Mariv and the Mincha, the Shmona Esreis are all the same. Only Shabbos has a separate Atikidashta for Mariv, a separate Yismach Moshe for Shacharis, and a separate Ata Echad for Mincha. Something to think about. But which one is Tefillah? Well, the real Tefillah, please stand up. Is Tefillah this sort of natural, organic conversation, free-flowing conversation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The image that we, perhaps some of us associate with Nachman and Breslov, and is the Shtapchas HaNefesh, is Hemias HaLev, a free-flowing conversation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, up on the dining room of my house in Bergenfield. When we moved from one house in Bergenfield to another house around a decade ago, we got a present from an Israeli relative. It's two inscriptions in one. Around the edge is your classical Birkat HaBayit. All the tefillah said this home should be full of peace and harmony and health and so forth. That's around the edge. In the center is Ravi Nachman's Tefillah HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that I should not lose my gaguim, I should not lose my yearning to move to Eretz Yisrael, to make Aliyah. So, enjoy the house, and don't forget this is only the next temporary house. But Ravi Nachman is famous for those sorts of tefillahs. This free-flowing conversations with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So which one is it? Is tefillah this free-flowing, breast-level conversation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Or is tefillah the structured, organized siddur? For Shabbos and for the weekdays and for Pesach and Hallel and this and that. Which one is tefillah? Is it organized and formal, or is it free-flowing and just come as you will? And then number 3, on the top of this Daf Mekarot, you see a pretty famous Gemara. You might have known that it's a Gemara, but no doubt you've come across this line in the past. It's a comment of the Medrash in Chumash Devarim, quoted by the Gemara in the first Avon of Maseches Tanis. Desanya la'ahavas Hashem Elokechem ul'avdo b'chol levavchem. A pasuk that's familiar to us certainly from Kriyat Shema. Pasuk speaks about worshiping, serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, being Oved Hashem b'chol leiv. So the Gemara quotes a Medrash that makes a simple and profound comment. Ezoi avoda shi b'leiv, which avoda is b'leiv, have yomer zu tefillah. To worship HaKadosh Baruch Hu with your heart, that must be a reference to tefillah. So we'll probably come across this many times in the past, that tefillah is avoda shi b'leiv, tefillah is a worship of the heart. Can we just stop and analyze that Gemara for a moment? What's the question that the Medrash is asking? We have this pasuk, it talks about avoda, and the Chachmei HaMedrash are trying to figure out, well, which avoda is it? And they come to the conclusion, this pasuk must be talking about tefillah. As a matter of fact, before we even go any further, you should know, there is a debate whether daily tefillah is a doraisa obligation or not. Everyone agrees that tefillah works. Tefillah is clearly that concept that's throughout the Tanakh, throughout Chumash, throughout the Tanakh. But tefillah matters. But is it obligatory on a daily basis min HaTorah? The Rambam says yes, the Ramban says no. The Rambam says, where's the pasuk in Chumash? Right here. The Rambam opens Hilchos Tefillah with this line from the Gemara. Tefillah is avodah shebelev. But how do we get there? The answer is, well, we asked the question. The question was, Ezoi avodah shebelev. Which avodah is belev? Meaning, the Gemara is wondering probably the following. If it just said la'avdo, what could avoda mean? What sort of mitzvah do you often refer to as avoda? Karbanos, right. But the Gemara is saying, if it just said la'avdo, it would be karbanos. But what organ of your body do you use when you bring carbon? Use your hand, right? So if it just said avoda or avoda siyad, that would be karbanos. But avoda shebelev, avoda is the heart, well, that's not karbanos, that must be tefillah. Simple question. The same way the primary organ of bringing a carbon is your hands, what's the primary organ of tefillah? So maybe your neshama, or maybe your heart or your peh. Now, the heart is clearly critical, and that's what the Gemara is saying. But the truth, the heart is critical for karbanos also. There's a whole seder of Mishnayos, I'm sure you're aware, dedicated to the halachas of karbanos, seder kachim. The very first topic and all the Mishnayos dedicated to Kachim, to Karbanos, is the role of thought. The opening topic of Maseches Zvachim, you bring a carbon with the wrong intention, so that could totally throw off the carbon. So clearly, thought and feeling, your heart is critical in Karbanos also, but the primary organ isn't the heart, primary organ is the hand. Isn't that true for tefillah too? Clearly, the heart and the mind are critical, but the primary organ is your mouth. You speak. You speak, and your heart plays a role. Just like with a carbon, you use your hands, and your heart plays a role. So this big fundamental description of tefillah is worship of the heart, and for the Rambam, this is actually a drasha d'oraisa. This is actually pshuto shel mikra. This is a source for tefillah. What does it even mean? Avodah shebalev. Why is tefillah avodah of the heart any more than a carbon? It's avodah of the mouth, and the heart plays a role. A karbanos are avodah of the hands, and the heart plays a role. So we're wondering what we could do to improve our tefillah practically. We're wondering which is tefillah. Is tefillah formal and structured in the whole siddur and the machzor, or is tefillah just a free-flowing conversation with God? And going back to basics, the source for the Rambam, who holds that daily tefillah is a Torah obligation, it comes from this opening line, Masechet Tanis. What does it even mean? Why is tefillah avodah shebalev any more than a carbon? This is clearly a very, very central definition, but it requires some understanding. It's so often the case in learning. I'm sure you've come across already in your adventures in learning, and Mirta Hashem, over the course of a lifetime to come, you'll continue to notice that it's part of the mystery and the magic of Talmud Torah is that it's so often the case that when you look at detailed questions, sometimes a question looks like it's at first about one detail of a topic, but as you begin to explore that question, the questions may be detailed, but it's so often the case that the answers give you much bigger vistas. So what I want to do is put these three big questions aside for a moment. How can I practically get better at my tefillah? Which is the real tefillah? And in what sense is the leiv so central with tefillah? Let's put those aside for a moment, and let's do a quick but deep dive into the sugya of kavana b'tefillah, which itself seems pretty central, but it's a detail. We'll take a look. We'll see a technical question that will bring us to a fundamental answer about kavana that may also give us not only appreciation of kavana b'tefillah, but a much broader appreciation of tefillah as a whole. So let's take a look. You have in front of you on the first side of the page two pieces of Gemara, Maseches Brachos, the middle prakim, the fourth and fifth prakim about tefillah. And here we have a Gemara from the very end of the fourth parak and Daf Lamed, and a Gemara from the very end of the fifth parak and Daf Lamed Dalet. They both talk about the role that kavana plays in tefillah, but as we're going to see, there's a small but a pretty significant difference. So we start with a start on top, Lamed Amud Beis. Gemara tells a story. Around 6-7 lines off the bottom. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Excuse me. Further down. Yeah, five lines off the bottom of that first box. Rabbi Chi bar Abba tzali v'hader tzali. Rabbi Chi bar Abba, an Amora in Eretz Yisrael, tzali is the Aramaic for his palel. He prayed, and then he davened Shema Esrei, and then he finishes Shema Esrei, takes it 3 steps back, 3 steps forward, and he starts all over again. Daven Shema Esrei, then repeated it right away. So one of his Talmidim was watching carefully, often a good idea. Amalei Rabbi Zeir was watching, and it's so often the case that there has to be that one Talmud who asks afterwards what happened, or else there's no story. I mean, the story happened, we'll never know it unless someone asks. So what was going on? So here it was Rabbi Zeir. Rabbi Zeir goes over to Chia bar Abba afterwards and says, they're walking back from shul, or whatever it was. He says, can I ask you a question? My time Avid Marhachi. How come the Rebbe did that? How come you repeat your Shemona Esrei? He ultimately comes to the conclusion that it was something totally technical. But let's see where he goes with this. Could it be that you didn't have kavana during your Shemona Esrei? You davened your whole Shemona Esrei, took it 3 steps back, and you realized it didn't really count. because it was a tefillah without kavanah. It's hard to imagine that's what happened to our Rabbi. Gemara, the earlier Chachamim taught us that I can't only ask myself that question afterwards. Before I step into Shemona Esrei, I have to first self-assess. Sometimes you're a couple minutes late for Mincha, you come in huffing and puffing, and the Chazan's already finishing Kaddish, and so the natural inclination is just jump in, 3 steps back and forward, all in one fell swoop, and I am in Shemona Esrei with everyone else. That's our natural inclination. It's coming from a good place, but the Gemara says actually, you can't enter Shemona Esrei without first taking a moment, stop, pause, self-assess. Look in the mirror, figuratively speaking. Am I ready to focus, or do I need to catch my breath? Do I need to get in the zone? La'olam yamad adam es atzma. Person has to measure himself, like midah, to be modeh. Am I ready to have kavanah, or not yet? So Rabbi Zeir says, hard to imagine. It's true that if Rabbi Chia wouldn't have had kavanah, he would have to repeat the Shemona Esrei, but it's hard to imagine that's what happened. So the Gemara says, you're right, he had kavanah, he had to repeat the Shemona Esrei for a technical reason. La'ad kamar derei shachar. It was Rosh Chodesh, he left the Yalav Yava. Okay. So leaving aside the Yalav Yava piece, great Amoraim also make mistakes sometimes. Okay, that's one thing to recognize, and they fix it. And he wasn't embarrassed to repeat Shemona Esrei. Everyone was watching. All the time Talmidim saw. Rabbi Zeir was one who asked the question. They all saw that the Rabbi forgot Yalav Yava. That's right. He did the right thing. He took the repeated Shemona Esrei because he left that Yalav Yava. But let's put aside the Yalav Yava piece. What emerges from the Gemara is that Kavana is not only a good thing, it is absolutely critical in Shemona Esrei. Shemona Esrei had Kavana, apparently you should check in advance, and if there wasn't the Kavana, it's not a Shemona Esrei. Okay?
Is that Kavana, or is that you missed a critical part of the daven?
Ultimately, what actually had happened historically is that he had left out the Yalav Yava. But Rabbi Zeir taught us a din, which is true, that had one left out Kavana, he would not be Yotzei the Shemona Esrei. And it seems like it's pretty essential. But now, step down to the second box. 4 blot later, moving from Daf Lamed to Lamed Daled, the very, very bottom of this box, third line from the bottom. A Jew is a davening Shemona Esrei. He ought to have kavana in all of them. All of them in all the 18, 19 brachas of the Shemona Esrei. But that's a tall order. You're not going to have, ideally you should have kavana throughout, but at least in the first one. In one. Which one? Amar Chia, Amar Rav, Amar Rav Safra, Mishum Chad Debei Rebbe, but others. It's not just pick your favorite bracha or pick the bracha that resonates with you the most, which at different times in life, different times of the day, different times of the year, different times in the trajectory of my life, different brachas will matter more. The Gemara says you must have kavana in the first bracha. Okay. So how do these two Gemaras hang together? What would you say? Do they hang together well? Do you see a problem? Yeah, Matas?
You have going to have Kavana first, but let's say you mess up, then the Yetzer Hara maybe gets in the way because your Kavana, it maybe you be doubting, should I go back, should I not? And then if you do the right thing and go back, do you have the same amount of Kavana the second time?
That's an interesting question. So Matas is raising the question of if I go back, will I even have the right amount of kavanah, which the poskim do talk about. It makes sense to redo your Shemona Esrei if you think you're going to have an improvement the second time around. And repeating the Shemona Esrei seems like a tall order. And the second Gemara said, ideally, you're going to have the kavanah throughout. You're only going to repeat the Shemona Esrei if you left out kavanah in the first bracha. Kavanah is important throughout the Shemona Esrei, but critical only in the first bracha. So Tosas, yeah.
I would make sure I have kavana for the whole thing. If I realize I only have kavana for one paragraph, get later do Shemona Esrei then.
What do you mean?
According to the first Gemara, I have to make sure mentally that I'm okay to have kavana for the whole Shemona Esrei. According to the second Gemara, if I'm doubting with the seaboard, but I realize I only have kavana for one paragraph, that should be okay as well.
Yeah, so that's a very good point. That's a very good point. The Tosfos asks your question. I don't understand. It seems like these two Gemaras are both talking about Kavanah being important, but not equally important. The first Gemara sound like Kavanah is critical throughout the whole Shemona Esrei. The second Gemara sound like Kavanah is ideal for the whole Shemona Esrei, but only critical in the first bracha. So which one is it? So Tosfos makes a suggestion. Well, the first Gemara didn't really specify. The first Gemara just said Kavanah is critical. 4 blot later, the Gemara gets around to working out all the details of when it's actually critical. That's the approach of Tosfos. There's only one rule. Now, if you were, again, the first Gemara said Kavanah is critical, and then the second Gemara sort of drills down on the details and says, yeah, Kavanah is critical, specifically in the first bracha. However, if you turn the page, you'll see a chart. And the top of the chart is more or less familiar because the top of the chart are the two Gemaras we just saw. On the right side, you see the Gemara Bracha Staf Lama and Beis. And that first Gemara, you should have Kavanah throughout. And that on the left side, the second Gemara Lama Dalam and Beis, you should have Kavanah specifically in the first Bracha. So Tosfos had said, these two Gemaras are really telling the same. There's two halves of the same story, making a general comment that Kavanah is critical, then specifically Kavanah is critical in the first bracha. If you were Tosfos and you were writing a sefer halacha, how many times would you quote these two Gemaras? How many entries would you have in your sefer halacha? One, right? And it would say Kavanah is critical, specifically in the first bracha. And the rest of the Shemona Esrei, it's ideal if you can get that level, but you're not going to have to repeat the Shemona Esrei unless it's only critical in that first bracha. So if you were Tosfos, you would have one entry. The two Gemaras are telling one story. Here's a problem. One of Tosfos' Sephardic contemporaries, the Rambam, did write a Sefer Halacha in which he prized organization. You know from learning Gemara that Gemara is a conversation. You often go, like any good conversation, you go from topic to topic to topic. The Rambam sat down and said, I want to take all of the bottom lines of all the Gemaras and all the other works of Chazal and put them into a coherent, logical order. Everything's going to have its place. Every idea will have its address. No matter what Masechta topic pops up in, we'll put it where it belongs. Location is critical, not just in real estate, but in the Rambam. Because where things are tell you what the idea is. So here's something shocking. The Rambam doesn't take these two Gemaras and blend them together. He actually puts them in two different parts of his presentation of Tefillah. Here, take a look. Let's start with and specifically, you see on this chart, try to make things a little more organized. The top row are the two Gemaras, the bottom row are the two Rambams, and he quotes each one here in Parak Yud, in the 10th Parak of Hilchos Tefillah, he quotes the second Gemara Daf Lamed Daled. In Parak Daled, the 4th Parak of Hilchos Tefillah, he quotes that first Gemara. And let's see what he says. Let's work from left to right. We'll go out of order. This will help us. Here in our Parak Yud, he says, Mishe Espalel v'lo kiven es libo, yachshav espalel b'kavana. I davened without kavana, should daven again with kavana, but here he says, as the second Gemara does, kiven es libo bracha rishona shuven etzach. But it's only critical in that first bracha. And now, move to the right, where the Rambam in the earlier 4th parak quotes that first Gemara. He says, Kavana halacha tezvav. Kavana is one of the items that is absolutely critical in our Shemona Esrei. Called tefillah she'eni b'chavana eina tefillah. Tefillah without kavana isn't tefillah. V'mispalel b'lo kavana chos mispalel b'kavana. You daven without kavana, got to daven again with kavana. Matzah libo mishubeshes. If I realize that my mind isn't clear, I shouldn't daven like we said before, like that first Gemara says, until I get myself in a better, more focused zone. So here you have it. The Rambam in Parak Yud on the left quotes the second Gemara Lamed Daled. Rambam in Parak Daled on the right quotes the first Gemara in Daf Lamed. And the contradiction is staring us in the face. Is Kavana critical? In Parak Daled, it sounds like Kavana is critical throughout. It didn't say anything about first bracha only. Not only that, but you look at his language, it's so rich. Called tefillah she'eni b'kavana eina tefillah. tefillah without kavana just isn't a tefillah at all. Why do you have to be so dramatic? Just move straight to the second sentence. Hispal below kavana, hispal the kavana. You daven without the kavana, you got to redaven with kavana. What's going on? Doesn't sound like the Rambam put these two together. It almost sounds, Chaim Brisker suggests, the Rambam is suggesting there are two different stories going on here. What's the rule? Is kavana critical throughout Shemona Esrei or only in the beginning? The answer is, what do you mean by kavana? Which we haven't really defined terms yet. We often, because we have all spoken, I wish I could daven with more kavana. What would you use? What would it look like if you davened with more kavana? Yeah?
Maybe Mishabura, but I think there's an argument that says that you take your 3 steps back, and your 3 steps forward, just walk in front of the gates.
Amazing, amazing. We're getting there very soon. What's your name?
Eli.
Gilad? Eli. Eli. Okay. I like that. Eli, you're ahead of the game. Most of us, when we think about having more kavana, we probably think about this. Specifically, it translates siddur. To have more kavana means, when I say rifa'inu, I'm actually thinking about people who are sick, people who are injured, who need a refuah, people who are healthy, who want to stay healthy. When I say baruch aleinu, I'm thinking about finding a job, keeping a job, economic stability. When I say tkab b'shofar, I'm thinking about Mashiach. Pirush hamilos, what to think about what you're talking about. But as Eli points us to, let's take a look. The Rambam actually asks this question. In the first more fundamental type of kavana, Perek Daled, the kavana that's critical throughout, he asks the question, Keitzad hiya kavana? What is this kavana? Sheyifanes libo mikol machshavos. Clear your mind of all extraneous thoughts, like you were saying. V'yir'eh atzmo kilu omed lifnei Shechina. To imagine as though you're standing in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Period. What's missing? How? Okay. How he said, clear your mind of all extraneous thoughts, which sounds like a meditative technique. Perish hamilos. He didn't say anything about the words. The kavana is to picture yourself standing in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What about all the things that I'm saying? Well, the things I'm asking for? Nothing. Chaim Brisker makes the following radical suggestion. The less important kavana is thinking about what the words mean. The more important kavana is recognizing who you're talking to. Cast your mind back. Think about a friend you've known for a number of years. If you can try to remember the first time you met and what you spoke about, likely you can't remember what you spoke about. Could be. If you think about lots of different types of relationships, friendships, business relationships, that first meeting, sometimes the point of the first meeting is to talk about certain content, particularly in a business context, but even in a business context, and certainly a personal friendship, what you spoke about the first time you met was probably secondary to the vibe. There was a click, you met someone you liked, and you begin to get along with each other, and of course you didn't just sit there and stare at each other. Of course you spoke about whatever it is you spoke about, but the content of the conversation in forging a friendship is often secondary to the spending time together. It's about the vibe. What you talk about is secondary to the fact that you're with each other. That, I believe, is what the Rambam is saying. The way Reb Chaim explains it, the tefillah isn't saying words. Just like that first meeting wasn't really about, the most important thing wasn't what you said to each other. Tefillah isn't saying words to God. Tefillah is spending time with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you don't realize that you're talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you don't realize that you daven. Because to daven isn't to say words. To daven is to be in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why the Rambam says the most fundamental kavana is to realize that you're face to face with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To realize that every time I daven Shemona Esrei, I have a standing coffee date with God 3 times a day. 3 times a day, I'm going to sit down for coffee, so to speak. Stand for coffee with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm going to spend a few minutes with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hanoch Teller tells the story, one of his books. A fellow was in Machne Yehuda, checking out the chalva. And there's a pistachio chalva and the chocolate chalva. And suddenly he gets like a punch in the chest. He's like, looks around. There was no one right near him. It was a bizarre thing, but no one's there. Okay? He walks on some more. He finds some oranges. He's smelling the oranges. He's looking at the tea. And again, a punch in the chest. He's like, who? And then he realizes he's not actually Machne Yehuda. He's actually saying, Shemona Esrei. He was so far away, his head was so elsewhere, but his hands were working automatically. So to not understand what the words mean, that's a lower level issue. That means I'm missing kavana number 2. Kavana's pirush hamilas. Of course, it's far more meaningful to understand what the words mean, but even if I don't know what the words mean, it could be I still davened. It wasn't complete. It wasn't ideal. That's the second, less critical type of kavana, to know what the words mean. But the more fundamental type of kavana is to know that I am in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And let's flip it. I don't have to be that, it doesn't have to be that Hanoch Teller sketch. I might come to shul and go through, I put on my talis and tefillin, go through the whole davening. And I was using the art scroll, and I was thinking about all the things that I'm hoping for. But did I stop for a moment and consider the fact that I'm face to face with God? The essence of tefillah isn't saying words. That's how I do tefillah. The essence of tefillah is being face to face with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If I don't realize that, then I didn't realize that I davened. I knew I came to shul. I knew I said the words in the siddur, but saying the words in the siddur isn't what tefillah is. It's what I do when I'm doing tefillah. But what tefillah is to be in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that, matas.
I feel like with the season, like if you're already asking God for stuff, specifically, like the Rob mentioned about, saying like let's say the words were playing and we were asking, of course, like for Cohen, wouldn't that be to an extent a level of connection with God? Because you're trusting God, you're talking to God.
That's a good point. So I think Matas makes an important point that if I am plugged into Pirush Amilas, if I'm really thinking through what it is that I'm saying, it's going to be hard to not also be aware of the fact that I'm talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is true. That is true. But the flip may not be the case. Right? I might not be fully cognizant of all the details, but I can still be aware of the fact that I'm in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Da lefnei mi ata omed. Now, this redefinition of tefillah, that the words are secondary. Critical, you can't. Just like you can't show up to a meeting or a date, even if it's a good date, and just sit there and stare for 2 hours. You are going to have conversation. The conversation is important, but the conversation is not the main. The content of the conversation is often not the main point. So this notion that with tefillah as well, the definition of tefillah isn't saying words. Saying words is what I do. The definition of tefillah is being face to face with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This explains a host of different. This could explain a host of different aspects of tefillah. We don't have time to dig into all the details. It speaks to the fact that Shemona Esrei, more than any other bracha, requires preparation. He Cohen l'kras Elokecha Yisrael, because Shemona Esrei, I'm actually sitting. I'm going to be faced, not just like talking on the phone, like when I say bracha, talking on the phone with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm going to be face to face with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Requires put myself together, physically, mentally. It explains a host of other details, but I want to circle back to where and end where we began. We had started with 3 questions, and let's respond to them in reverse order. Our third question had been, for the Rambam, the fundamental statement of tefillah in Chumash, tefillah is worship of the heart, worship of the mind. Why tefillah more than karbanos? We said, I understand. Karbanos are are worship of the hands, even though the heart plays a very important role. Isn't that true for tefillah as well? It's worship through the mouth, but the lave plays a critical role. No. Rambam Lishitaso. The mouth is secondary. You don't just stand there and stare and not talk, but the mouth is not the primary. Unlike the karbanos, for tefillah, the primary, as important as the mouth is, the primary staging ground of tefillah is the lave, is the heart and the mind. And we had wondered which is the real tefillah. Is the real tefillah the formal, structured siddur, or is the real tefillah just the organic, free-floating, breath of a hishtapchus hanefesh? And here we are back at the corner of Brisk and Breslev. Because ironically, but not surprisingly, Reb Chaim Brisker's understanding that through reading the Rambam, as you said before, we dove into some nitty-gritty details, but are coming out with a very big vista idea. That tefillah is much more than words. As important, as critical as the words are, they're secondary to the essence of tefillah, which is the being face-to-face with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the answer is, which one is the real tefillah? The answer is yes. They are the tefillah. Tefillah is being face-to-face with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in that context, I speak with him. What do I say? So there's a certain minimum amount per day. For the Rambam in HaTorah, it's once a day. And whether you're Rambam or not, everyone agrees, the halacha l'maaseh, 3 times. The minimum is 3 times a day. If you want to do more, you can do more. Tefillah is expandable. Tefillah is extendable because tefillah is being in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If I stand there after the formal brachas of Shemona Esrei over and continue to speak in my own language, or if some other time, not in the context of Shemona Esrei, wherever I find myself, I speak quietly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for a few minutes, those are all the one and only tefillah. Tefillah is to be in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A minimum of 3 times a day. A minimum of the formal siddur. That's the formal siddur is the baseline. You want to add more? Go ahead. It's all the real tefillah. And finally, let's close with a 2-minute challenge. 8-minute challenge. I'm sure you fellas are very busy. I imagine you can spare 2 minutes a week. You probably can find that in your schedule. Extra 2 minutes a week. Let's try the following. Imagine if before you start Shemona Esrei, which we say around 22 times a week, imagine that either before you take your 3 steps back and forward, or after you take your 3 steps back and forward, before you start the Shemona Esrei, take 5 seconds. Not a long time, 5 seconds, but actually 5 seconds. We're so used to always moving and doing and saying and always on the run, moving to the next thing, good things, that we rarely just stop and pause for just 5 seconds. But when you actually stop and do nothing and say nothing in 5 seconds, it could seem like forever. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just pause for 5 seconds before Shemona Esrei, and no deep Kabbalistic kavanas. Just this deep kavana. I'm about to come face to face with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Profound doesn't always have to be complicated. It could be simple and profound. Try it. It's around 2 minutes a week. 5 seconds per Shemona Esrei. That's 15 seconds a day. That's less than 2 minutes over the course of the week. Less than 8 minutes over the course of the month. Give it a try for the next 30 days. Imagine if, Plinetta, you were to try to invest 7-8 minutes over the next 30 days in simple, powerful, and potentially transformative. That's exactly what the Rambam said. You want to work on your tefillah? Let's begin with recognizing what tefillah actually is, which at its core, beyond which words and how I sing it and what nusach tefillah I use, is being face-to-face, spending time with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. 5 seconds per Shemona Esrei. Let 7-8 minutes over the course of the next month can transform my tefillah by bringing me back to basics and focusing, as the Rambam instructs us, based on the Gemaras. That's what that is truly Avodah Shebelev. It begins here. To be aware when I walk into Shemona Esrei that I'm sitting down with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is making time for me. We're going to be face to face in the next 10 minutes. This can transform my tefillah, can transform my relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I want to take this opportunity once again to thank the Rosh Yeshiva and all the Rabbeim, and each and every one of you for the opportunity to learn Torah together. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did.